morning, everyone, and I would like to thank Chairs Rapp, Chairs Frankel, and of course my counterpart, Chair Cutler, for joining us today, along with all the members here. In a moment, we'll allow the members that are with us to introduce themselves. Honestly, very candidly, I'm not convinced. But the whole point of this conversation is to actually have a meaningful conversation about what the role of the state government is in terms of creating some kind of statewide policy that would impact every school district. And I like to point out that we have 500 school districts that represent 500 widely diverse communities in our Commonwealth. I like to tell a story. During COVID, my school district, 17,000 students in the Allentown School District, one of the most economically disadvantaged school districts in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I know it well. My kids go there. And during COVID, we had over 3,000 households representing about 6,000 students in the Allentown School District that only had access to the internet via their cell phones in their homes. That was it. It was the only way that they had any ability. So when our teachers were printing off photocopies of textbooks and creating drop-off zones and doing all the things that they needed to do during the pandemic, in many ways the only lifeline our students had to their teachers to when some of the asynchronous stuff went online was using their cell phones. And honestly, I don't know that all of them knew how to actually use their cell phones properly. So looking at that as a one school district, 1 out of 500 school districts examples of the need to appropriately learn how to use technology is something that is very much in the back of my mind. With that said, as I've told the maker of the legislation in the House, Representative Steele, I'm absolutely willing to keep an open mind. We have a lot of testimony today from two very distinct groups of entities, those in the public health sphere and those in the public education sphere. And I'm very interested to learn on those, to have a conversation. What I will ask folks, testifiers, before you testify, we have your testimony. We've all had the opportunity to read your testimony. So we don't actually need you to read your testimony to us. We are actually capable of that. Whether or not every member here has done it, that's up to them. That's not up to me. But we find, at least in the Education Committee and Chair Frankel, with your permission, that we get a better outcome of these informational hearings by having conversations with testifiers. I'd like to hear from the individual members about things that they're concerned about, relying on your expertise to help us learn more about the topic. So with that, Chair Cutler.
Thank you, Chair Schweier. I'd like to also echo thanks to Chairs Rapp, Frankel, and Schweier, as well as all the testifiers that we have here today. This particular issue is actually one that hits very close to home. My own kids are 22, 20, and almost 18. I shared with the folks from Unplugged as they were advocating in the office. My wife and I have the distinction of being the most barbaric parents on the face of the earth because we did not allow our kids to have cell phones until they were about 13 or 14, depending on their individual sports schedules. And we heard about it. But I for one, am looking forward to hearing from all the testifiers and the advocates of different policies, because I do think it's important. Because as a parent, I can tell you this is an issue that we personally struggled with, that level of access to technology versus the negative impacts of, in particular, social media and what that means in terms of the interactions, not just with our kids and their phones, but quite frankly with one another. There's nothing more disappointing than walking into a room full of young people and then seeing them all sit on their phones rather than engage with one another or discuss issues face to face. You can watch who's texting who in the group, and I can tell you that as a parent, I do long for the days when I was a kid and we were able to simply I had the privilege of growing up in the 80s and 90s. We could go out, we could hang out until dark, or when our parents would yell for us to come home. And times were much simpler, and there was definitely a break between school and home and the way that those interactions occurred. I, for one, did our best to replicate that with our kids, but I also understand that there are some positives that come with technology. So my goal from this hearing and from the testifiers in particular is I'd love to hear how we strike that balance. How do we ensure that they have access to the most up-to-date information while at the same time ensuring that they're able to develop like young individuals should. So thank you, Chair Frankel and Chair Schweier and the testifiers for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for the chairs. And before we start, let's go quickly around the room and have members introduce themselves and their districts. Thank you.
Good morning. Danielle Furlatten from Chester County, Pennsylvania, District 155.
Good morning. I'm Representative Mary Isaacson, 175th District, Philadelphia County.
Hi, Christine Howard from the 167th in Chester County.
Rep. Tarakan, 194 Philadelphia.
Arvin Venkat, 30th District, Allegheny County.
Mandy Steele, 33rd District, fellow barbarian parent of 4, 8, 10, 12, and 14. They do not have smartphones.
Jessica Benham, 36th District, Allegheny County. No kids, and thankfully the cat has not yet learned how to use cell phones.
Lisa Borowski, the 168th District in Delaware County.
Jim Prokopiak, 140th District, Lower Bucks County.
Regina Young, the 185th District, Philadelphia and Delaware County, and I am too a barbaric parent.
Representative
Grant Stairs, Schuylkill County from
sorry.
the 107th.
That's okay. Jill Cooper, District 55, Westmoreland County.
Barb Gleim, the 199th District in Cumberland County.
Madam Chair, if you'd like to go.
I was just going to introduce myself, Representative Kathy Rapp. I represent Warren, Forest, and a part of Crawford. Thank you.
And I'm John Schlegel. I represent the 101st Legislative District in Lebanon County.
Charity Krupa, I represent the 51st House District, and that's Southern Fayette County.
Brad Roy, District Number 6, Crawford County and Erie County.
Roman Kozak, 14th District, Beaver County.
Brian Roszo, 56th District, Westmoreland County.
Joe Diorsi, 47th, York County.
Mark Anderson, 92nd District, Northern York County.
Leslie Rossi, District 59, Westmoreland County.
Representative Malou McKenzie, representing part of Northampton County, Lehigh County, and Montgomery County, the 131st District.
Representative Jamie Walsh from the 117th Legislative District in Luzerne County.
Dave Zimmerman, represent Northeast Lancaster County, Southern Berks.
Thank you, members. I have the honor of introducing the first panel, which will be focused on the health implications of cell phone access during the school day. Speaking to that issue, we have Ms. Lisa Graham, a school counselor at Seneca Valley Intermediate High School, Dr. Beth Sanborn, president of the Pennsylvania Association of School Resource Officers, and Dr. Mitch Prinstein, chief of psychology for the American Psychological Association and professor of neuroscience at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I'm going to ask Dr. Sanborn, who I know is under some time constraints because she has to testify at another hearing, I gather, to kick us off. And if everybody who's here, I think some people maybe online, could come up from this panel if they're not here. I don't know who's online. So, Dr. Sanborn.
Well, thank you so much. I'm a fellow barbarian, so I feel a little better, even though I'm the only one sitting on this side of the table. Good morning, Chairperson Schweier, Cutler, Frankel, and Rapp. My name is Dr. Beth Sanborn, and I've proudly served in law enforcement for nearly 30 years. 7 of those years I served as a school resource officer in the Wissahickon School District in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. I'm here today speaking as the president of the Pennsylvania Association of School Resource Officers, representing all of the safety professionals who work in our schools with our kiddos, our staff, and our parents every day. But not too long ago, if kids had a fight in the cafeteria, it stayed in the cafeteria. It was over, it was done with. However, now, These fights extend to hundreds of other kiddos in just moments. It spreads faster than we can even respond, and it isn't just rumors anymore. What we're seeing are arguments that are orchestrated and choreographed. They're organized and planned, and oftentimes meant to be held away from the watchful eyes of the staff and support folks in schools who are meant to keep kiddos safe. They have organizers and planners who are there to film, who are meant to cause distractions and diversions away from these activities. Our students aren't just using phones to plan fights. They're arranging meetups for illicit activities. Imagine, if you would, how many sets of feet you should see in a bathroom stall. When you see more than two, it's a reason for concern. They retreat to electronic conversations where anything can be said seemingly consequence-free. Our cell phones are pulling away our kids from meaningful relationships and the structure that schools provide to keep our kiddos safe. When determining how I was going to testify today, I considered having my verbal language contradict with my nonverbal body language to see if you chose to pick up on it. We only get to see that when we have these encounters in person, face to face, and that gets missed out through electronic conversation. I can tell you firsthand the number of text messages I've misinterpreted or arguments that I've picked with my husband because I misinterpreted conversation. But let's talk about emergencies, because that's where my years and experience in law enforcement truly apply. In crisis situations, cell phones create chaos. If students are connecting with parents or calling friends instead of following staff instructions, they can miss critical information. They can fail to notice what's happening around them. What we rely on is for our students and our staff and our community to be aware of their immediate surroundings, what they see, what they hear, what they smell, and specific instructions from trained staff members who are meant to handle a critical incident. There is not an emergency plan anywhere that includes a student use of a cell phone as part of the emergency response procedure. We need folks to stay calm, to listen, to focus, and allow those trained adults to lead. But that's just talking about an emergency situation. Let's take it back down to our day-to-day interactions in our schools. Students are ordering DoorDash and Uber Eats to come to school in the middle of the day. A Chick-fil-A set of nuggies is much more appealing than the cafeteria food. They're ordering Chipotle bells, and what happens is that we work tirelessly to control access points to our schools, and while it may be a well-intentioned student, we have delivery drivers coming around to all sides of our buildings, and students are opening the doors to these strangers. While we work so tirelessly to ensure that our buildings are safe and secure, we're unknowingly undermining the entire safety posture of the building. Bell-to-bell, phone-free policies aren't about punishment. They're about protection. What we've seen firsthand is the relief that our students are experiencing when they no longer have to be tethered to a device to pay attention to what's happening, with who, where, and when, whether or not they're included or excluded, whether or not they feel they have to live up to this constant stream of competition and figurative keeping up with the Joneses. Teachers are getting instructional time back again. Believe it or not, our kiddos have opinions and preferences. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They don't want to be overlooked. And these policies afford them the opportunity to participate and engage again. Across Pennsylvania, PASRO members overwhelmingly support these policies because they make schools safer, physically, emotionally, and socially. Our mission in Pennsylvania is to protect, to educate, and connect, and these policies support all three. Let's let our kids be kids. By the way, as a mom of a 22 and a 19-year-old, my kiddos didn't get smartphones until their late teens. And I knew that that was the right decision because as a lifelong law enforcement officer who has dedicated her professional personal, and volunteerism to school safety and the well-being of our kids, I see more harm than good. I want our kiddos to learn how to interact with each other, to face conflict and adversity, and develop the coping skills to be healthy, successful, productive members of society. So on behalf of PASRO and the 1.7 millions that we serve, thank you for prioritizing student safety and listening to those of us who live and work this every day.
Thank you, Dr. Sanborn. I know we have some folks who've got some questions, but I'd like to get through can you stick around for a little while so we can get through the other testifiers and maybe have some questions or comments from members?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Prinstein.
Hi, thanks so much. Good morning, members of the Pennsylvania House Education and House Health Committees, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the online dangers facing our children and teens. Psychologists are experts on all human behavior, and we've been studying the effects of technology for many years, as well as recent advances in social media, AI, and smart devices. But these advances have progressed faster than even the research. In my written testimony, I offered a summary of what we know so far, including some potential benefits, but also some clear risks that are relevant for you to consider as you develop new policy. Several of these concerns are summarized in recent health advisories from the American Psychological Association, including those warning of the potential dangers associated with adolescents' use of AI, the biological mismatch between social media features and youth's brain development, and the misuse of AI or wellness apps to treat psychological disorders. One of the purposes of today's hearing, as I understand it, is to consider youth's use of personal smart devices in school. Many nations around the world and many US states have now adopted policies to limit phone use at school, and research is currently underway to understand the best policies that will benefit kids, including bell-to-bell restrictions of phones, watches, and tablets, or the addition of restrictions to school-issued devices that limit youth's engagement in non-academic online platforms that may increase risk. So far, research offers us a few important insights. First, we know that youth use personal smart devices in school quite often. Recent data suggests that high schoolers spend an average of 20 or more minutes each hour during the school day at school on their devices. So a third of every hour is spent on their phones. Second, we know that device use likely obstructs learning. Research clearly demonstrates that most humans cannot multitask, but rather are rapidly task shifting, a process associated with poor memory and comprehension among youth. Youth are not as effective as adults at task shifting. Third, not surprisingly, a child's device in school leads to their poor academic achievement. But perhaps more surprisingly is that the child's device use is also associated with poor academic achievement for the students sitting behind them. Secondhand screen time effects thus have the potential to detrimentally affect academic progress for an entire classroom. Fourth, we know that youth are predominantly using their devices for social media platforms and now increasingly interacting with companion AI platforms when they're using their devices at school. They do so because these platforms are built to capitalize on a biological vulnerability among youth that makes tweens and teens hypersensitive to peer feedback and attention. These dopamine and oxytocin circuits are now hijacked through platform design features such as likes, notifications, comments, followers, and sycophantic agreement embedded within human to AI or bot interactions. Data suggests that over 50% of youth in samples around the world report at least one symptom of clinical dependency to social media. And now over 70% report engagement with companions on AI that in some cases have led to disastrous and tragic consequences. To be clear, the problems youth are experiencing subsequent to social media and AI use are not exclusively based on the content included in these platforms. Research shows that the platform features themselves, including those mentioned above, as well as beauty filters, AI-generated content, and algorithmically recommended content, are changing how the brain responds to images and messages online. It's these platform features and design that are designed to keep youth engaged for far longer than is healthy and is associated with increases in academic, behavioral, and psychological difficulties over time. Youth themselves know that they are using devices too much and now are experiencing what scientists refer to as digital stress, a phenomenon resulting from too many notifications across platforms, a fear of missing important updates, information overload, and anxiety that their posts will be well received. In recent months, AI companions likely contribute to this stress by deceptively posing as humans, sending notifications to re-engage with them online, and making claims of emotional attachment to youth that manipulate our human attachment instincts. About 45% of youth report that they experience so much digital stress that they're unable to carry out their normal daily roles and routines. Findings reveal that more digital stress predicts increases in depression over time. Moreover, social media use at home, the leading cause for sleep delays and disruptions today, is leading to decreased growth of white matter in teens' brains at the most critical period of neural reorganization in their lives. So what can we do? First, we must increase funding for research and access to data held by tech companies to better understand the effects of device use on development. Second, parents and teens must become better educated about these emerging findings. Digital media literacy curricula exist, but have not been tested for effectiveness and are difficult to deploy among already overwhelmed school staff. Investment in broad-scale educational campaigns would be an outstanding investment to curtail the public health, academic, and economic impacts that current technology use will likely have on generations of youth. Third, the manipulation of children to generate a profit is unacceptable. The use of children's data should be illegal, and the use of psychological tactics known to create addiction or implicitly influence children's behavior should be curtailed. Moreover, laws in most states designed to protect the public by prohibiting unqualified humans from identifying themselves as psychologists, for instance, should also be applied to chatbots who are readily and frequently referring to themselves as licensed mental health providers. APA is heartened by the focus on mental health by these committees and eager to work with you to protect children. Your actions now can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prinstein. We now have Ms. Lisa Graham, I gather, online.
Yes. Hello. Good morning, chairs and members of the Education and Health Committees. My name is Lisa Graham. I am a school counselor at Seneca Valley Intermediate High School, located in the suburbs just north of Pittsburgh. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. I have been an educator in the Seneca Valley School District for the last 20 years and have had the opportunity to witness our student personal technology and cell phone policies evolve. New for the 25-26 school year, Seneca Valley implemented a bell-to-bell no cell phone policy where students are not permitted to use their cell phones from the first bell to the last of the school day. In past years, students could use their cell phones in study halls during lunch, in the hallways, and at teacher discretion in classrooms. 3 months into the school year, the impact of the bell-to-bell policy has been overwhelmingly positive. The most immediate and noticeable change that we've seen is the increase in student face-to-face interactions. Last year in the cafeteria, it was common to see full tables of students sitting together but talking to no one and instead scrolling on their cell phones. This year, we see students laughing, talking, and even playing games. They've started playing cards games like Uno. One table even created their own version of a high school show and tell. Because students aren't filling their downtime with their phones, they're developing social and communication skills. They're making new friends. This increase in connection fosters a better sense of belonging at school and is benefiting their mental health. We have also noticed an academic impact. Without phones as a distraction, students are more focused and present. When they're given independent time to work in class, they no longer rush to finish so they can go check their cell phone and receive that dopamine rush of notifications. One art teacher specifically shared with me how his students' art is so much better this year because, again, students are willing to spend the time to improve their projects. Cell phones are no longer a distraction in the classroom. The improvement in the quality of classwork has been noted by many of my colleagues. Students are also taking more classes. At the start of the school year, during our add drop window, students came to guidance requesting to pick up electives and drop their study halls. This was not something that was common in previous years, and so when we inquired, they said that they were bored in study hall because they could no longer use their cell phone and would rather take a class. For the first time in years, cell phones aren't competing with academics. A phone-free school has also created a safer climate with drastically less conflict and bullying. Last year, I met with students multiple times a week about conflict tied to cell phones, usually stemming from remarks that were made on social media sites like Instagram and Snapchat, or from text. This year, I have only received 2 such reports, and both incidents had occurred outside the school day. This year, I have received 0 reports of cyberbullying. Last year, it felt like I was receiving these weekly. As a result, students are spending less time in the office upset and more time in classrooms learning. The complete absence of cell phones from our school day is creating a safer and kinder school environment. The transition to this bell-to-bell policy was easier than most expected. Over the summer, our counselors and special education teachers reviewed student accommodations that allowed the use of phones and revised them so students' needs would continue to be met. In most cases, needs were easily addressed using the district-issued student laptop. In our 9 to 10 building, there are only 3 students who have exceptions to the cell phone policy, and all are for medical health plans related to diabetes. In closing, a bell-to-bell policy has been easy to implement and has made a significant positive impact in our school. The increase in social communication and student engagement, coupled with the decrease in conflict and bullying, is transforming our students' mental health and our school climate and culture. I have heard others say, and I would agree, that this is the best start to a school year we have had in a long time. The building feels happier, calmer, and more connected. A bell-to-bell no-cell policy works, and it is what is best for our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. We have several members who have questions or comments. I'm going to ask if everybody can be as brief, both in terms of posing the question and in answering the question, because we have 2 more panels to get through. I'm going to start with Representative Isaacson.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I find this an interesting topic that we have to address. And coming from an urban area, you know, and certainly not just because I'm in an urban area, but we don't live in a world that is always necessarily safe, and the school is not always a sanctuary. I myself, when my son was in 9th grade, his second week of school, his school went on lockdown because of a shooter who is loose in the city. And his first reaction, as he had to sit there for hours, was to text me and say, "I'm okay." And being diagnosed with anxiety, I can imagine how fearful it was for him. And the safety point was to reach out to mom. So I'm not, with regard to the social media, I absolutely agree. But I don't know what the sweet spot is of making sure that children are able to have accessibility, at least to their phone and texting services, should an emergency arrive. And I guess this goes to you as a school resource officer. I understand that children need to be paying attention and listening to the people that we entrust them to when faced with such situations. But when you're in lockdown for hours and the anxiety is building and you're sitting in a room and you're not allowed to touch things, you're not allowed to be near doors, you're not allowed to be near windows, and you're just 14 years old, if you don't have access to just say, hey, Mom, I'm okay. An hour later, hey, Mom, I'm okay. If you ban the ability to have any access to your phone during the day, maybe it's banning it, it's in your book bag or whatever. That's the hard part I have getting to banning all phones from school. So I don't know how you address that.
Thank you for that question. I will be brief. It's a shame that we even have to have this conversation, and I think we can all agree with that. Not being able to contact a child doesn't necessarily mean that they are not safe. And what we have to be aware of is that simply the child not being able to contact their parent or parent not being able to contact their child doesn't put them at any more risk. Our staff members still have phones. Our staff members still have access to learning management systems, records management systems with emergency contacts for all of our kiddos' families. I would say this is a terrible situation. And by the way, if they were in lockdown, a matter of semantics, but important, that would mean there was a problem within the walls of the building, not outside in the community, because that would be an improper response. But that's not what we're discussing. A staff member would be able to make that communication on behalf of that child. It's difficult to be able to process that. And as having anxiety in kiddos in the K-12 system when I did, it's something we have to think about. But the end-all be-all is not the communication to the parent.
Thank you. I have Representative Schlegel, Representative Friel-Otten, Representative McKenzie, Representative Kozak, Representative Roy, and Representative Gleim, and I'm going to cut it off there and again ask everybody to be as succinct as possible. Thank you. Representative Schlegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to share a scenario on behalf of constituents I've talked with on this topic, and I certainly understand the concerns in the classroom about attention and psychological issues. But the situation I want to share with, and perhaps any number of panelists might be willing to speak to this, is a situation where parents that have joint custody just simply have a need to reach out to get a message to their children. When we talked about that, I mentioned what has been said in some of the testimonies, the common sense factor, where you can always call the office. And the response was, well, if we're worried about attention in the classroom, and there are a number of students that are in that same situation, quite frankly, there could be any number of classes on any particular given day where a message could be given to the office, and then somehow that has to be transmitted to the student. And the concern is that not a disruption also? So I'd be interested in any comments that any of our panelists have towards that particular scenario.
Sure. I can just briefly say that in other states where this has been already deployed really successfully, it sounds like either parents with resources have resorted to smartwatches instead, which prohibits use of social media, or they've simply emailed their kids on their school-issued devices. And that seems to take care of both of the issues that have been raised before.
Thank you. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because Representative Gleim needs to leave, so ask Representative Gleim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. I have a school group here, so I have to leave early. And I just really have a statement to make, not so much of a question, and it'll be fast. So I introduced House Bill 1238 at the beginning of this session. And this has become model policy on the national level, and it just, what this bill does is it just limits the cell phone use during instructional time, just like what was testified to. And then I just have a response to Chairman Schweier that the state's role is to guarantee a thorough and efficient form of education, and that doesn't just include money, okay? We have data that shows that limiting the cell phones actually improves academic performance. And we also prove that we get involved in these type of things because we voted for the science of reading, which also does a very similar thing. And I just want to mention that most schools that are one-to-one have a tablet, which renders the cell phone a personal toy. And we don't necessarily tell students you can't use, makeup or do certain things during, the time that they're eating their lunch. My bill also has exceptions in it for students that have a medical issue and for first responders in particular. It also allows the teacher to have autonomy in her classroom. If she decides to have the kids pull out the phone, that's up to the teacher. So I probably would support your bill for a total ban, but I really think that, through the 2 years that I've been working on this, that a compromise is actually in House Bill 1238. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Free-Lawton.
Thank you, Chairman. I echo some of the comments from my colleagues with regard to emergency situations at school. Unfortunately, as a person who experienced 9/11 as a young person and also as a parent who's watched numerous school shootings unfold across this country, the idea that I may never be able to hear my child's voice for the last time in a situation like that is something that weighs heavily upon me, and for that reason, I have real big concerns about limiting access and taking away that parent's opportunity to make that decision for their child. I also have a concern with some of the school-issued one-to-one devices. So while we want to make the decision for parents about whether their child should have access to technology, from a government perspective on this part, parents, and this is a battle I've fought with my own school district, have no ability to control what's coming into their home from the school district. My children have had a school-issued device since the age of 5. We personally did not allow devices in our household at the age of 5, and so that has always been a battle in our household, and I know that that's something that my neighbors, my fellow parents also have concerns about. I don't personally want devices in my home that are not under my control in terms of what my children have access to and the time that they spend on those things. And so if we're going to dictate what parents can do in terms of giving access to their child to devices, I also think that we need to give parents the ability to make decisions about what is coming into their home from the school district, because I have numerous times asked if I could opt out of that and have been told no. In addition to that, communicating through school-issued devices on personal family matters, whether it's I'm picking up today instead of mom, or any other family matter, unfortunately puts that information in the hands of a state institution. And as an elected official who unfortunately has been subject to political, really disingenuous things, a personal communication that I made about my son's IEP was given to a political opponent in a right-to-know request, sharing personal information about my child. And I have extreme concerns about personal communications from a family on school-issued devices. And so I just don't think that that's an answer to these questions. I also have a son who is dyslexic. Devices have proven to be an extremely helpful tool to him in his education. Listening to content versus reading content helps him learn better. And so the decisions my husband and I have made about devices in our household is to help our children to integrate technology into their lives in a healthy way. We educate them, we work through social media, the internet, YouTube with them. We explain to them why watching YouTube shorts is not healthy for your brain, because it's teaching your brain not to have attention span, right? We talk about those things. My kids have a very high academic achievement, both of them, one of them with a learning disability. They both are very, very literate digitally. And they are both very good at self-regulating, because we've guided them from a young age as parents on how to have a healthy relationship with social media, with technology and with devices. We don't allow devices upstairs on the second floor of our home. We don't allow devices behind closed doors in our household, but we do allow devices because we want to teach our kids how to integrate technology into their lives in a healthy way. And I believe that in our education system, it's important to teach our kids how to deal with the world as it is in a healthy way that is productive for them. And so I just asked the question of, like, yes, I understand there's a lot of things that make technology inconvenient and difficult to manage. We're all dealing with that in our lives, but technology can be a really positive force in kids' lives as well if we as parents teach them how to integrate it into their lives in a healthy and responsible way. And so I ask, what is the answer to the kid who's dyslexic? What's the answer to the kid whose parents are in two different households and do need to communicate? While my family is a single household family, I coach kids 6 days a week, and I am very well aware of the many, many different situations families are dealing with and how technology assists them in managing their lives in a more healthy way.
I'm going to move on to Representative McKenzie.
I find your testimony a bit alarming for several reasons, but I first want to say I agree with Representative Isaacson and Representative Friel-Otten. As a mother, my young son was working in New York City on 9/11 at Times Square, and in those brief moments when the self-service was still working, he was able to call me and say, "I love you." Self-service cut out, and for 48 hours, I didn't hear from him again. And if that had been the final communication I had with my son, I would have clung to that forever, for his sake and mine. So when you talk about the anxiety of the kids in the school situation, there's also anxiety for the parents on the outside waiting to hear the conditions that are facing their children. So while I was also a teacher, I understand the need to focus. However, that's always been an issue in the classroom. Whether the kids were daydreaming back when I was a teacher or passing handwritten notes back and forth, they weren't concentrating. But anyway, I would not want anyone to not have access to their phone in the case of an extreme emergency. Now, as a teacher, this is the other thing I don't quite understand about teachers nowadays, because when I was a teacher a long time ago, granted, and the kids may have been more respectful of the teacher, we could lay down our rules in our classroom, and I could say, turn off your cell phone, keep it on your desk, and, I'd get a little back talk or whatever, but I was pretty capable of enforcing basic rules in my classroom. And then the other thing that really troubles me about this is when you say we should trust the administration to communicate with the parents or something. If they cannot even make sure that the doors are kept locked in the school buildings, I don't know that we can trust our kids' lives with these people. After all we have seen in the news about an unlocked door and access to a school by a shooter, I find that very alarming. And I appreciate all that the law enforcement officers do in the schools, and I want even more security in the schools. So however we can do that, but please do not cut off communication between parents and children.
Thank you. Any of the panelists want to respond to the last two members' comments, kind of on the same theme?
Sure. Just happy to mention that the concerns about being able to talk with kids is, of course, very real and very important, and we've heard that before in the other states. What we're hearing is that the amount of distraction that kids have by sending out those texts or those emails actually is creating potential risk for them when there is a dangerous situation. So it is a concern. Again, there are some workarounds with the use of email or a watch or something like that. What's particularly important is that the research is incredibly clear that kids' use of phones is overtaking their ability to control their own moderation with these devices. The development of their brain is such where kids are incapable of stopping themselves from using their devices to an extent that makes it akin to clinical dependency. So giving kids the access to this during instructional time is really just unfair for them. They can't regulate themselves as much as they would like. They are showing decreases in grades. They are showing increases in stress, mental health difficulties. This is happening across the board every day for every kid with their device if they have unrestricted access to it during school time. So we're just trying to balance that with some of these other possibilities that may have workarounds.
Thank you. Representative Kozak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Steele, for having part of this, your bills. The discussion here is really important, and Representative Gleim, thank you as well for your work in this area. So as a teacher, right before I came into the House here this past year, I was a teacher for 10 years as well as in a guidance role. And I noticed something probably in I want to say around 2017, 18, 19, something switched in students' ability to communicate, particularly with adults interacting with fellow students and just willing to have conversations. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. COVID happened, and I kind of blamed some of it on the pandemic. And then I read Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And if you haven't read the book, I think it should be required reading for every parent in this generation because it connected so many dots for me. And when he explained the advent of the iPhone, particularly the iPhone 4 around 2010, 2011, it clicked why the students around the time that I saw 2018 or so started having trouble. And I think it aligned with the students who became what they called the iPhone generation, or those who were connected to the internet 24/7. So it was fascinating to me just as a case study, anecdotally for me, but also to see some of the research as well. Now, we know these algorithms that exist on social media that cause significant addiction, and we know that there's physiological effects, as been explained here as well by Dr. Prinstein. And we often are talking about how do we protect our public health. And we know we have a mental health crisis in this country. And I don't think that it's coincidental that the rise of smartphone use is also correlating with the rise of mental health, the mental health epidemic in this country. And I think we really have to consider that. We talk a lot about personal responsibility and parents' decision-making, and that's absolutely 100% part of this. But I find it also fascinating, too, that when I'm talking to teachers, one of the things that I keep hearing from teachers in my area, kind of as an aside, is, hey, can you figure out how to deal with these cell phones? Because my administration hasn't done it yet. And they're noticing it in the classrooms and the distractions. I think technological application for utilizing technology doesn't require a personal device in the classroom. I think technology can be learned and taught and through devices in the school, limited usage of it, but proper usage of it. So I don't think that you have to have a personal device on you 24/7 in order to learn how to use technology. I think you can, with my own children, I've noticed that as well. So, Dr. Prinstein, my question for you, considering the mental health epidemic, the constant connectivity, the performance anxiety that students are having regularly socially, do you believe that there is a correlation between the rise of personal device usage and dropping test scores? We see those test scores lowering throughout the country, really. And I'm thinking such things as attention span, distraction, and so forth. Can you speak to that, if there's any research on that?
Yeah, there are likely many causes for what we're seeing in terms of these academics areas as well as mental health. Most of them are not preventable. The one contributor that is preventable is, in fact, phone use. And the reason why we're seeing some of these difficulties is that the platforms are built to try and get as much data as possible from kids and to sell that data to make a profit. Kids are not given the opportunity to consent in a way that's appropriate for them. And it's what they're getting are things that they know will keep them engaged. So a remarkably high proportion of kids are being exposed to content while they sit in school that's teaching them how to engage in anorexia-like behaviors, how to engage in self-cutting. We're seeing all kinds of cyber hate and discrimination that kids are experiencing. And we're finding that these factors are predictive of kids' own mental health difficulties and even behavior that they might exhibit at school just minutes later. We were able to collect some data in a Canadian province to look at the effects of a phone-free ban that occurred a year before we started hearing about this in America. One of the most remarkable findings was not only the reduction, a significant reduction in discipline referrals and mental health difficulties among the kids, we actually saw a huge reduction in teachers' own stress and their desire to stay engaged as teachers. The phone ban was predicting an increase in teacher satisfactions with their jobs. So we're often talking about the effects on kids, and the comment that was just made is referring to some of the factors that have been contributed. But importantly, we're also seeing that school administrators and school teachers are finding a huge benefit when these kinds of changes are made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our last member is Representative Roy, and just note we are over time limit at this point, so as quickly as you can, so we get to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder why this can't be done locally. In my district, off the top of my head, Pencrest, Crawford Central, Northwestern, those school districts recently did phone bans. You know, some of them are bell to bell, some of them are you're allowed to use your phone at lunch. 5 people on a 9-person school board can pass a cell phone ban. To get a state law passed, you need 102 people in the House, you need 26 in the Senate, and then you need the governor to sign it. So it's very difficult to have a law changed to have a one-size-fits-all thing statewide. But this can be done locally. Like I said, a lot of school districts in my legislative district have already done this locally. They share a lot of the same concerns that have been talked about. So I guess my question is, why not, how come all the people testifying today, why aren't they just encouraging local school districts to take this up locally rather than trying to get it done statewide?
Sam?
We are.
I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on that, but we'll leave that. Yeah, all right. That probably, as Chairman Schweier says, would probably be more appropriate for the next panel. With that, thank you, panelists. Really appreciate your testimony and the engagement of our members, which are clearly very interested in this issue. And I'm going to turn over the next introductions to Chair Schweier.
Thank you, Chair Frankel. Thank you to all of our testifiers on behalf of Chair Cutler and myself. We very much appreciate the conversation that we had. We're going to introduce panel 2 coming up, and we're going to ask both Jeff and Laura to join us. Come on up right away. Mr. Jeff Nye is Vice President of Pennsylvania State Education Association, and Ms. Laura Morton, who's Director of Policy Services for the School Boards Association. Just a reminder to everybody, please, for the love of God, don't read your testimony. We got it. We've had a chance to look at it. And for members, you know, we do have session at some point in time today. So please be direct with your questions. And let's try to get as much information as possible because we do have one more panel after that. So with that, Mr. Nye, if you'd be so kind as to give us a little synopsis of your testimony, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to testify in front of this joint informational session in front of the House Education and Health Committees. As we said, my name is Jeff Nye. I have been a teacher in the Wilkes-Barre School District and coach for the past 28 years. So I'm speaking to you today not only as an educator, but also as a person who represents many different viewpoints from our 177,000 members across PSEA. So, as we were instructed, I'm not going to sit here and read my testimony today, but I would like to bring up a couple key points that were in it. First, as stated by somebody on this committee, our country is in a youth health mental crisis. We have seen a tremendous rise in mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and the lack of environmental regulations. And it corresponds with the young people's access to mobile devices and social media. Second, mobile devices are disrupting students from learning. Your average teenager gets 237 notifications a day. 237. Think about how those pings and how they are getting during the 7 hours of the school time, and they're supposed to be learning. They aren't capable yet of compartmentalizing and consistently prioritizing schoolwork over the immediate response to those pings. Next, access to cell phone facilitates more peer-to-peer cyberbullying. Children's brains are still developing, and they can't always control their worst impulses when they have a constant access to a device that can be used to easily relieve their frustration or feelings. And finally, it's more than just cell phones. We're talking about personal devices that have connection to the internet, including smartphones, watches, fitness trackers, and tablets. So PSEA members have had many discussions on personal mobile devices in schools over the last 18 months. And they have reviewed the research. And their feedback and other resulting positions have evolved considerably since our first discussion back in April of 24. The General Assembly needs to take action to establish a commitment foundations for public schools to prioritize our own students' personal mobile devices. That foundation should prohibit the use of mobile devices during the school day on school property. In general, we should also restrict their possession, but allow school entities, as was stated earlier, to decide how that possession is actually restricted. Our educators strongly believe that this approach strikes the right balance of allowing school entities to work with their local communities, including students, parents, and school employees, on how possession is restricted. Some of our school entities already have policies, as stated earlier. Phones go in lockers or book bags. Some have lock bags to limit the access. Some have pouches within their schoolrooms that allow students to put their phones in there while off, but still in the classroom. There should be a decision of the districts with the right input to the communities with the backing of this legislature. I want to also address a few additional principles that PSEA wants to see in this legislation. First of all, the definition of mobile devices. It needs to expand more than just smartphones. We need to include watches, tablets, fitness trackers, and such. Students, parents, school employees, and local communities should be part of this conversation before any school entity provides a policy. There also should be limited exceptions to the use of mobile devices in our schools. We do understand that students in some situations do need their mobile devices. Medical use, students that track their medical conditions using a special app on their phones. Students with IEPs and 504 plans. Students that need it for translating during the school day. Our members recognize that there could be opportunities for educators to also teach technical literacy. There should also be classes within the school day, like yearbook, that would require the cell phones to be used. PSEA does look forward to working with these committees as well as your colleagues in the Senate to advance legislation to the governor's desk that addresses all of our 5 principles. Thank you very much for inviting PSEA to testify. And again, when we're done, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Morton?
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Chairman Schweier, Cutler, Frankel, and Chairwoman Rapp, as well as members of the House Education and Health Committees. Thank you for inviting the Pennsylvania School Boards Association to testify today on cell phones in schools on behalf of the 5,000 local public school leaders that we represent across the Commonwealth. Not only am I the Director of Policy Services at PSBA, I'm also the sister of an 8th grade math teacher. So this is a topic that I get to hear about pretty much anytime I talk to her. So she is constantly having to come up with ways to try and keep the cell phones out of her students' hands while she's teaching. One technique she has tried to employ is to place, as a math teacher, she has calculators in her classroom, so she places those in a hanging shoe holder, and then during the class, her students have to put their cell phone in that shoe holder when they take a calculator. So this ensures that they still have access should there be an emergency, but also keeps them out of their hands while she is teaching. So currently, it's up to the locally elected school directors in each school entity to decide what their policy on electronic devices will be. To assist those school leaders with managing the use of cell phones and other electronic devices, PSBA has developed a policy guide on devices that are used as a baseline for creating their own policy by our members. They're available to the members who subscribe to our policy services, and they're intended to be reviewed and customized locally by the administration, school solicitor, and school board, and amended based on local practice and needs before being presented at a public school board meeting. PSBA does not tell school entities what to do in terms of regarding student use and possession of electronic devices. Within the policy guide, we define electronic devices very broadly so that the policy would not necessitate frequent updates as advancements are made in technology, but school boards can revise the definition as desired to best fit their local needs. The policy guide contains a multitude of optional sections and language that could be included, removed, expanded upon, and customized by the school entity. The policy guide can be tailored by the school entity to strictly prohibit all use of electronic devices, authorize use of electronic devices at any time during the school day, or prohibit or allow use anywhere in between those two ends of the spectrum. And school entities can also choose to develop their own policy on electronic devices. PSBA estimates that approximately 425 of Pennsylvania's 500 school districts have adopted some form of an electronic devices policy, although the contents of the policies vary based on their local requirements and procedures. Included in my written testimony is a sampling of school districts across the state that have either recently adopted or modified their electronic devices policy and their approach to either allowing or prohibiting such devices. Of those districts in that sampling that prohibit use of electronic devices, all of them make exceptions for students who require them because of an individualized education plan or 504 service agreement. And several also note exceptions for health, safety, and or emergency reasons. However, these examples demonstrate that school entities around the state are developing and implementing policies on cell phones that work for their school community. Any legislation proposed or enacted needs to provide school entities with clear guidance on what is expected and or required of them. Legislation should also provide school entities with flexibility to allow locally elected school leaders to make decisions regarding electronic devices which best suit their school communities. Though not all may agree with those decisions, the elected school directors are best suited to hear the concerns of the students, parents, teachers, and administrators and formulate a policy which works for their schools. Legislation should also not require a board policy to go into too much detail. Much like how the General Assembly will establish broad general rules, which are then to be implemented by regulations or state agencies, board policies are meant to operate the same way. The board will establish broad general statements and policy, which are then implemented by the school administration. PSBA stands ready to work with the General Assembly and administration on legislation which meets those criteria. Public schools across the state and nationwide are united in their goal of providing a safe and orderly educational environment for students in which to thrive. Managing the use of electronic devices is not meant to deny students access to technology, but rather to set appropriate boundaries for its use to ensure students' overall well-being. PSBA thanks the committee for their time and attention to this matter and working to create the best solution for students and school entities. Thank you.
Thank you both. A little chairman's prerogative here. We have questions from Representative Frill-Otten and then Representative Anderson, but I'm going to kick it over to you, Rep. Roy, for follow-up on what you had asked at the tail end.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you probably heard, yeah, my question, why can't this just be done locally at the local level? A lot of school districts already have. It's a lot easier to get something done locally than statewide. I guess that's my question. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's because right now there is no statewide legislation. It is done at the local level, and that's why we try to provide our school entities with a policy guide that they can tailor to their needs. Yeah.
I mean, just a clarification. The sample policy, that's fine, but you don't need a state law for a sample, phone ban policy. I guess my question is, can't all 500 school districts just do this on their own rather than us passing a state law?
I think the whole purpose of passing a state law for this specific issue is to allow and give individual school districts the backing of this body to make sure that whatever policy they do enact is also covered under state law. So that way they can, with the help of their communities, create that law knowing that they have everybody here backing them up.
Thank you. I'd like to mention for the record that we're joined by Representative Schusterman, who also was online the entire time, along with Representative Watro, and Representative Sanchez is still online, and Representative O'Mara had been participating for much of the time. With that, Representative Frill-Otten.
Thank you, Chairman. I like a lot of what both of you had to say in terms of the recommendations for the guidance. And I guess my question is, similar to Representative Roy, but how would a state statute help school districts, and also how could it hinder? I guess my biggest concern is we live in a state where we have urban districts, we have suburban, we have rural areas that have very limited cell phone even access and Wi-Fi capacity. I would imagine that every district across this Commonwealth is going to have different needs, different populations, all of the things. So to me, a state law would potentially hinder the ability to create a policy that works best for that community. And so how would a state policy help, and how would a state policy potentially hinder an effective policy?
I think the state policy is going to help, once again, by allowing our school boards to know that there is a greater body other than those individuals that stand behind them and will take advantage of the opportunities that lie in front of them. We also still believe that any of those policies should be in conjunction with the communities that they serve. They need to, because you are 100% correct. I mean, there's going to be a difference between every district that we have across Pennsylvania, and they're going to each need their own needs in order to do so. But in order to have a policy, you're going to need to have that backing to make sure that it is followed through and that there cannot be those loose exceptions that get expanded as people challenge what a school board may decide from school board to school board.
Thank you. Representative Anderson?
I think it's important to point out these kids, they're addicted. We have an addiction to cell phones. It's not just, hey, when they can use them, they're addicted to them. In my class, I had them get out their phones and ask them, how much screen time have you had today? Half their day. I wanted to ask our resource officer, but I think this is important to point out. Of course, we as parents want our kids to call us when they're in trouble, or we should want to help them when they're in trouble. But understand, when your kid's calling them when there's a shooter, 1,200 other kids are calling parents. And the thing I hear from law enforcement constantly is you have 300 parents descend on a school when there's a fire or a shooter, and it actually puts more kids in danger. So I think that's important to point out. And any teachers in the room can say, when you tell a kid to put away their cell phone because they're on the phone, more times than not, they look at me and say, well, it's my mom. So that's a problem. Mr. Nye, I just want to ask you, of the 144,000 teachers, not that you can speak for every one of them in the state of Pennsylvania, How many of you heard say, well, you know what, we don't really need a ban. We need cell phones in the classroom, as compared with this is interrupting education and it's hurting kids?
Thank you very much for the question. The majority of the members that we contact are in great need of some kind of policy that that makes this kind of ban acceptable and able to be enforced by our teachers. You're 100% right. Our teachers do not want to be the phone police, and they don't want to have to spend half of their day making sure that the students are not using their phones. I know even in my own 5th grade math class, students were smart enough to get my attention to help one student in the front of the class, while at the back of the class, they're texting each other the answers, and that's just not the appropriate learning. My wife, who is still in the classroom, has a great policy that's in her room to deal with some of the issues where you have to contact parents. The students have to come to her desk and in front of her be able to use their phones. If that is what the community decision is for the policy, fantastic. That would be wonderful as well. And as far as like the horrible things that could potentially happen in some of our schools, the last thing we want to see is those phones actually being used by the people that are trying to get into our buildings because they hear a ping or they hear somebody talking that is hiding at the same time. That's why these kind of things need to be done.
Thank you. Representative Bonner, I saw you snuck in there. Sorry for not mentioning you earlier, sir. Thank you for joining us. Next, we have Representative Cooper.
Thank you for your testimony. I've signed on to both these bills. I think we as lawmakers have to realize that cell phone usage is not good for our children, and to ignore it is no longer an option. Just like a parent has pressure to give their child a phone and to acquiesce to what other people are doing, teachers in a classroom have the same type of pressure to not let children use their phone or to let them use their phone. I think the time has come, based on the research data that has been provided, for us to do nothing is not acceptable. As a body of legislators, we should absolutely support our children and support the school districts and the teachers and providing a legislation that helps. I was interested to hear from the Seneca Valley School District, because they allowed to, I think by reading the testimony, they allow students to have the cell phones on their body. So if there is an emergency, they can still use it for that, but they can't pull it out during the day, or they have so many times where then they would have to give their cell phone over to the office. So, you know, I think it's a matter of training the students and being able to use the cell phones appropriately. But I thank you for your testimony today. You know, I feel that we should definitely put some type of legislation forward to back our students and to back our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Takek.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm struggling because I understand the elements of local control versus state mandates in this case, but I'm also thinking about what are the elements of good legislation, right? I mean, I see things like clear guidance on what's expected or required, but also flexibility, then enforceability. You know, something that's too broad is ineffective. Something that is not designed for the worst case scenario allows loopholes. I'm just really curious about, you know, in your mind, what does ideal legislation look like? Are there models out there, good or bad? Because we're sort of trying to thread a needle here that is Solomonic in its challenge in terms of how to do that. So any thoughts, any guidance on how we can manage to put the elements of good legislation into a bill that allows for 500 school districts to have the kind of flexibility and decision-making power that you envision?
Thank you very much for the question. If I had the perfect language to hand over to this committee, I think that's exactly what we have done. What we have actually done in our testimony is we just asked to be part of the process to help craft that language, because obviously I'm a fifth grade math and science teacher. I don't have all of the answers, even though my students may think I do from time to time. It is the opportunity that we have to be able to work together, not only just with this legislature, but also with our community groups to address all of those situations. Do I think that there is a one-size-fits-all? No. But I also think that there is language that can be crafted as a general principle, as that framework that every district could use moving forward, and then make those limited adjustments to deal with the very specific situations that they have within the confines of their district.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And with that, Chair Frankel, I'll just let you know we're back on schedule now. Sir, you're welcome.
Well done.
That was just fun for me. I apologize. But I'd like to thank you both, Mr. Nay and Ms. Morton, for joining us today. You've both and your organizations have been incredible stakeholders throughout this process, not just on this, but on everything that we've done. We genuinely appreciate you and your teams for all of your hard work. With that, we're going to bring our third and final panel up here, panel 3 on a question of local perspective. Dr. Amy Arcurio, who's the superintendent of the Greater Johnstown School District, who has also hosted this committee for a hearing in her school district last year, which we appreciate. And Mr. Matthew Davis, who's a AP Psych teacher from Penn Manor School District. So thank you both for joining us. While you're coming up here, again, please, a reminder, a summary of your testimony is welcome. Anything more than that, and it's not. And to members, please make your questions direct, and so that we can engage in an active and good conversation. So, Dr. Arcurio.
Good morning to the members of the House Education and Health Committees. I am Dr. Amy Arcurio, the proud superintendent of the Greater Johnstown School District, and I'm here today representing the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators. Thank you for convening this hearing and for inviting PASA to share the perspective of more than 1,100 members, including over 600 currently serving as school superintendents, assistant superintendents, and executive directors across the Commonwealth. My testimony today aims to highlight the growing evidence and concerns of excessive cell phone use by students during the school instructional day. At the same time, PASA urges that any statewide policy preserves local flexibility, allowing school districts to individually tailor implementation based on their unique communities, their resources, and their student populations. As school leaders, we must understand that successful policies require our community's trust. Families, students, and teachers must feel that rules are reasonable and responsive to the realities. Effective policies give local autonomy and allow school leaders to partner with community stakeholders to design policies that reflect community expectation. It also allows those policies and procedures to be phased in gradually. A uniform ban, unfortunately, may unintentionally disadvantage certain students. Those who rely, as stated previously by colleagues on previous panels, that use translation apps, health monitoring devices, accessibility to tools on their phones, and of course, students who need to contact their parents in the case of an emergency. District flexibility allows us to provide clear, compassionate exceptions to protect the safety and the accessibility for our students while maintaining instructional focus. Flexibility should not mean the absence of accountability, though. What the state can do, and this is specific to the question was asked of the previous panel, what we believe the state can do is to set those clear expectations. Require every school district to adopt a cell phone policy. The policy would address instructional time use. Also, mandate annual public reporting so that you folks have clear data on exactly what is happening in your individual districts in the regard to cell phone policies. Also, we definitely need, as school leaders, for grants to be provided for professional development and for technical assistance for both practices. As school leaders, we see daily how deeply technology affects our students' attention, relationships, and their overall well-being. It is time to reduce distractions during the school day for the welfare of our students. However, the success of any statewide policy will depend on how it's implemented at the local level. Districts must have the flexibility to choose the tools and the strategies that make sense for their schools, for their families, and for their individual communities. A one-size-fits-all mandate risks unintended consequences. A flexible framework, guided by shared goals, both effectively helps school districts and implements fairness across all of the Commonwealth's children. Thank you for your continued attention and commitment to this issue in public education, and I would be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And our final testifier for today is Mr. Davis, who's an AP psychology teacher at Penn Manor. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and to the Education and Health Committees, thank you so much for taking on this important issue in the service of the students of this Commonwealth. This is my 22nd year teaching in Lancaster County, and I truly enjoy that job, but I've seen drastic changes over those 22 years, as you can imagine, with technology in the classroom, both student-issued devices and also personal devices that students have. Part of my role, I'm a little bit unique here for, I think, a couple reasons. One is that I teach AP psychology, so we focus on issues like attention. We use the phrase attentional flashlight, that when my attention is in one place, I'm missing everything sort of outside of that beam. And so because I teach that to students, it's easy for me to talk to them about how their cell phones impact their learning. The other reason I might be a bit unique is my district does not have a unified policy. We've been given general teacher autonomy to craft policies within our own classrooms. And over the last few years, I've sort of been developing the policy myself that I'm using now. That is, all students come in, they put their phone in someone called it a shoe hanger that I'm not too familiar with, but a little calculator pocket in the back of the room. That's where it remains for the entirety of the class. I know some students go to other classes in my building that is not the case, and they have more freedom to use their phones. Just from my personal experience, I can share that I've noticed two large improvements from this policy in my classroom. One, as Ms. Graham from Seneca Valley mentioned earlier, students are producing much better work. They're taking their time, they're focused. The collaboration that I've seen is better than I've seen in many years in my classroom, and so that buzz is sort of back. The buzz of students interacting, even if it's slightly off task for a moment. It's face-to-face, it's interactive, and that's something that I really enjoy. The pacing is much better in my classroom, and we're getting through more content. Students feel more prepared for tests going into those because we've had time to review. Another anecdotal improvement that I've seen is simply that face-to-face interaction in those down moments. Coming into the classroom, leaving the classroom, I see students more engaged with each other. Chairperson Cutler mentioned earlier, walking into a room with seeing a bunch of students just looking at their phones, and it's a pleasure not to see that as often in my classroom anymore. And so I've found some benefits of that as well. I recently gave an informal poll to students about how it's going because I know they do have other classes where they do use their phones. I was actually surprised at how positive students view my class in terms of the phone policy. One student even said that, and this was only one, said, I actually enjoy turning my phone in. Several students, though, mentioned they feel more focused, they feel more productive, and they feel more engaged in the class. And so for me, it's been a resounding success. There were a few negative comments, mostly students who wanted to contact parents or who felt like they were good students and didn't need to be told what to do. But overall, I've seen a great benefit. In the past, I've had some policies that dictated students just keep it away during class. But as Dr. Prinstein mentioned before, the addictive nature of this, it makes that difficult. Students are constantly sneaking looks at their phone if it's near their person. And that even affects people around them, as has been mentioned. When I got into teaching, we talked a lot about the whole child, educating the whole child, and I think that's vastly important, that I'm not just a social studies teacher, I'm not just trying to teach content. I want their well-being to be meaningful and to be productive in the school setting. And so for me, that lack of access to cell phones has been a huge boost to all of those things. So I appreciate the conversational nature here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. But thank you again for your time and to the service to our students.
Thank you both. Chair Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In developing your own policy, I'm just kind of curious what that autonomy that you had to do that for your classroom. Would it have been easier had you had some kind of systematic floor or minimum requirement, coming from the school district? Or do you ever get pushback from the students of, Mr. or Ms. So-and-so doesn't make me do this, and that conflict that occurs there, if any?
Yes, I definitely hear that from students, that I don't have to do this in other places. So I do think that consistency would be very nice. I'm hearing that a little bit less this year because some more teachers are on board with it. So students are a little bit more used to a more restrictive cell phone policy. And I don't know if this is a perfect analogy, but I remember we came back from the pandemic and my district decided that we were all going to wear masks, and that was just going to be a local policy. And about a week or two into the school year, the state decided that was going to be something for all schools to do. Those first 2 weeks, I felt like I was the mask police and constantly saying, pull up your mask, pull up your mask, pull up your mask. When the state came and said, this is what all schools are going to do, I felt like it was less of an issue for our district. So I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but that's sort of, that consistency I think would be really valuable for us.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Representative Freelot.
Thank you, Chairman. So I have an interesting question in terms of like educator in psychology. Our school district, I feel very fortunate. Part of our library program is digital literacy for our kids. I found it to be a really, really helpful tool as a parent because of, I think 85% of this addiction to devices and technology problem is what happens outside of school, not what happens inside of school. And I think a lot of parents are giving unfettered access at home or outside of school and don't have the tools to even understand how to use parental controls, what is and is not safe for their children, allowing their kids to have YouTube accounts that are out to the public and they're putting themselves out there. Our school district actually teaches that in the library program to our kids. So they're learning about their digital footprint from the age of 6. And so I wonder if there's any good curriculum available or recommendations along with, I coach 6 days a week and the cell phones get put in the hallway with the bags before everyone takes the floor. So I understand the need to give a place and space for putting the technology away when it's appropriate. But is there also education we can provide along with that to help kids and potentially help parents to understand their digital footprint, understand how to regulate, understand what the brain science is so that they understand what they're doing when they are engaging with digital media?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of any specific curriculum. I know it's part of my course that I teach, but I would love for that to be a part of all districts. I think that's a very valuable program. And listening to earlier, I would love to have your children in class. They sound amazing. And so I appreciate what parents and a lot of the parents in the room are doing. And because you're right, we spend 7 hours a day with them. And so what else is coming? Where are they coming from? And where are they going home to becomes a challenge. So that type of curriculum would be very valuable. I'm sorry I don't have a specific one that in here, but it would be great. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask going once, going twice, if there are any other questions for this panel from any members, either side of the aisle, either committee. Very cool. Well, then we'll start with a wrap-up. Chair Rapp, do you have any final comments? And then Chair Frankel? I'm not smart enough to come, or at least I'm not quick enough to come up with that pun fast enough, but I'll take credit for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and all of the testifiers who were here today and spoke on a very important issue facing our students. Some of the testimony was very eye-opening and concerning to me. So while phones are a fact of everyday life for a vast majority of people, they play an especially significant role in the lives of today's youth due to social media. And with reliance on cell phones and other devices, there is evidence that this reliance affects students negatively with their mental and emotional health, a shortening of attention spans, and a decrease in the ability to communicate effectively face-to-face, or even by simply calling someone on their phone. I have problems with that with my grandchildren. They like to text, they never want to call. However, as with any piece of legislation, the General Assembly must decide whether a statewide ban or restriction is the best course of action, or whether we should leave these decisions up to local officials, namely school boards and the citizens who elect them to govern their specific school districts. Some school districts may want a total ban on cell phones. Some school districts may just want to restrict their use during class time. Other school districts may decide that they do not want to adopt a cell phone policy. What is good for a school district in Allegheny County might not work for a school district or the school district of Warren County. As I understand it, there are different versions of this bill in the Education Committee of both chambers. And while I have not decided how I may vote on such a bill, if it receives consideration on the floor, there are several concerns that I do have. One is the cost for policies that require students to give up their cell phones at the beginning of the day by placing their phones in a lockbox or other secure location. Who is paying for the lockboxes? Written testimony indicates that individual lockboxes or even the shoe holder, some of them could cost up to $20. Multiply that by the number of students across the Commonwealth, and we can come up with a substantial price tag. Responsibility, what happens, and maybe you could speak to this, if a phone is lost, stolen, or damaged while in the possession of the school, who's responsible? And for parents, I'm particularly concerned for parents who need access to their children if, God forbid, a school incident occurs and parents are shut off from communicating with their children. I can appreciate the testimony from the PA Association of School Resource Officers about students having their cell phones during a crisis and why that may be problematic. But try telling that to parents who are attempting to reach their children during such a crisis. And exceptions, any bill on this topic needs to have exceptions allowing cell phone use. Examples that come to mind are medical reasons, 504 plans, IEPs. I was concerned when I heard testimony that IEPs have to meet the school policy when an individualized program is supposed to be individualized for that particular student, which in my opinion would override school policy. That's my opinion. We must be careful in allowing school administrators to override these exceptions. Any bill on this issue, whether it prohibits cell phone use or merely requires school districts to adopt a cell phone policy, must take effect at the start of a new school year. It cannot take effect in the middle of a school year, and I think this would be quite disruptive for schools, parents, and students. In the end, parents can now limit where their children take their phones, if they want them to take them to school or not. So that is up to the parents, and if we have local control, obviously that's up to school districts too. If any relevant bill comes up for a vote on the House floor, I want to see what the final version looks like, of course, and after any amendments, and to determine whether or not I can support that. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to start the wrap-up on the discussion, and thank you again to all the testifiers. It was very informative.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm trying to figure a Kathy pun out, and it's just not coming to me fast enough. Chair Frankel.
Thank you, Chairman Schweier, and thank you all the members, and particularly the panelists. This has been extraordinarily informative morning to talk about this very important issue. I mean, it seems indisputable that smart devices in classrooms are harmful to the education of our children. And how to address that, I think, is really the conundrum that we're facing here in the legislature, whether to look at a statewide policy. To me, it's pretty compelling to at least create a framework that gives the backup to school districts and schools to provide this type of policy, because it really, I know the pressures that take place from parents and students when a policy is not evenly applied. And then the question is, how flexible is the legislation in terms of giving school districts some flexibility in terms of how to implement it. I should note that 20 states today have a complete ban on smart devices in the classroom. 16 have a partial ban, and there are 17 states that leave that to the individual school districts. So I think, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that might be helpful and may have been my omission would be to get a perspective of what has happened in these other states that have a complete ban or a partial ban, and how that's been applied. I know the National Conference of State Legislatures would probably be a great resource in terms of getting that information as we tackle this issue and try and craft a piece of legislation that really addresses a lot of the concerns we heard from our panelists and our members here today. But it's clear that this is something that is important for the future of our students and our classrooms across the state of Pennsylvania. And I look forward to working with you and our members to craft something that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Chair Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my fellow chairs and members for joining us. I want to thank the individuals today for testifying. I also want to thank you, quite frankly, for making me feel somewhat normal in the fact that, the way that we approached this with our own children at that time is now, as we are learning, actually backed by science as well. So that, as a parent, makes me feel good that we were making wise choices in those situations. And as we look at this as a policy, I want to also thank you for sharing your individual experiences as they've been impacted in the classroom as teachers and as educators and as parents, who some of the advocates, stopped in to see me earlier today as well. But I also want to be mindful of the challenges that this presents. I think that we would all agree on a few things. When you look at our current performance in many of our testing areas, we continue to struggle. To Representative Anderson's point, there is certainly something addictive about the phones, and I will admit, as an adult, I too check mine constantly. And that is a struggle that I think as a society we have to recognize. But I want that balance with parental rights and, more importantly, parental involvement, because I think good parental involvement on this particular issue actually would go a long way, because of the points that were made that the school day is only 6 or 7 hours of actual interaction, but what are the students and what are individuals seeing outside of that time? There are parental controls. We implemented them on all of our devices while our kids were younger. And I think that as we look at this as we go forward, I think that it is important to exercise these rights and responsibilities responsibly, but also ensuring that they don't negatively impact our educational opportunities and what can be done there. I also want to echo a concern that I heard briefly addressed by some of the testifiers, and that is the fact that if some school districts already have a policy that would be more expansive than whatever the state minimum might be and whatever the proposal might be, I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize that element of local control and what in fact may already be working somewhere else. So I think it's important that we talk in terms of guardrails or minimums as opposed to a blanket answer across the Commonwealth for every student. And lastly, I want to speak up on behalf of the teachers, because I think Mr. Davis brought a very important issue up. And that is this. We expect a lot out of our teachers on a daily basis. They have went well beyond just educating on the individual subjects that are sometimes at hand. They are many times mental health counselors. They are interventionists in terms of student behavior that might not exactly be advisable or in their best interest. We end up, implementing school lunch programs, identifying social needs and other social determinants outside of the classroom that might impact their learning environment. So I think that we also have to be mindful of not adding one more responsibility on them in terms of, essentially being the phone police, as Mr. Davis pointed out, as occurred during the pandemic with the masks. And I think that we have to be mindful of that because they have enough issues to manage on a daily basis. So we should strike good policy with also good delegation, and we should back them up in those opportunities. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, and thank you. First and foremost, thank you to all the testifiers that came forth. Thank you for getting your testimonies in on time. Thank you for helping us, frankly, keep the this hearing on time. It's not an easy thing to do when you have two committees. I'd also like to thank committee staff, both Democrat and Republican, for both the Education Committee and the Health Committee. It was a pleasure working with the Health Committee on this one, and I genuinely appreciate the perspective that they brought. And the reason why we did it with two committees is there's a very clear scientific, psychological, psychiatric concerns that we heard from a number of testifiers. There's also an operational issue that we have from all of our school districts. We've heard a number of conversations just about how different our school districts are. We've heard concerns from legislators, how would it impact us and our communities, our very unique communities. I also think today was really instructive just about how challenging education policy can be in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to make. We did not have a typical breakdown of perspective, Democrat or Republican, today. I think we heard Democrats and Republicans be on both sides of the issue depending on the individual perspective from their communities. We didn't see any particular clear breakdown of urban versus rural versus suburban legislators in hearing their perspectives. There's no obvious path to a product. I'm not saying that there isn't a path to a product, but there's no, your side negotiation. How do we do it? This has been interesting. It's been fascinating to sort of hear all the different perspectives from individuals. Frankly, I will say it's refreshing that we haven't fallen down on sort of traditional tribal lines of Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, urban, rural. It's been a lot more nuanced than that, which I think is important for us as we look at legislation. And so the commitment that I have, that I made from the beginning, is that I personally will keep an open mind. There were certainly some things, impact of social media and such, that I was particularly interested in today. Also, that our staffs will continue to work with interested legislators to try to, and stakeholders to try to come up with a solution that might fit all school districts without, to Chair Cutler's very insightful point, being overly restrictive. Looking at things from a perspective of guardrails, I think, is incredibly important to folks. With that, I will also remind members that there are 9 additional written testimonies in here from everybody from organizations like Teach Plus that we work with on a regular basis in the Department of Education to a student, but also the Education Commission on the states. We've relied on them. Both of our caucuses have relied on them to provide a lot of very detailed information from other states and how they're doing similar conversations on this and a whole host of things. And so again, I do want to thank everybody for a thoughtful conversation. I think this was one of our better hearings that we've had. Everybody being honest about a perspective and not just falling into, again, those traditional lines, and a full commitment that we'll continue to work on this and other issues. With that, this hearing is adjourned.